Alright, so we are continuing here Ches Amibez. Right, we're holding by, there's one more piece of Gemara until we end this huge Sugya. We're working right now on the Drashos. We had two different Braisos to explain why is it that the ervah in the Mishnah doesn't do yibum and also the tzarah. Right, one Braiso is the Gimel Amibez, it's the derashah Aleha. And the second Braiso we had in Chesam Aleph was Rabbi. It says by yibum ulakach v'ma. So the extra haze he darshan to answer the ervah and tzarah, and then we had that variation Rava versus the first two Mahalchim. Rava learned that really there's no need for a source that she's also and her tzarah is also. In the conclusive shot of Rava, the need for these pesukim is to teach me that shalom makom so there's a heter. So yesterday we started going through what does each Tanna do with the other one's drashos, the Alehas and the extra haze. So we got through the extra haze of Rabbi. What did the Rabbanan do with that? We went through litzrar also. What did Rabbi do with that? Now we're going to start today the reverse. What does Rabbi do with the extra Aleha that the Brais and Gimel used to darshan these Oraysa the tzarahs? He doesn't need it because he learned it from the extra haze of lakach v'ima. So we're starting with the 4 lines for the bottom. V'Rebbi hayolah my avdile. So what is Rabbi going to do with the Aleha written by Achos Isha? He's going to use it look at the Tanna. It's going to be a very long piece of Gemara. The Brisa says, "In chayav and Beis Din ela al davar shezdon karos v'shkakas chatas." So the Brisa is discussing when a Beis Din will make a mistaken psak, they have to bring a korban. It says in the pasuk for the mistake. A korban chatas. So they only bring such a korban if the psak they were dealing with was something which they said is okay, but really it's kares if it was done b'mezid, it's chatas if it was done b'shogeg. V'chein HaMashiach, also by the Kohen Mashiach, the same requirement of lo b'avaras Chachamim, and that's in one parsha. There's also a whole different parsha in the Torah, in Parshlach, which also is dealing with when Beis Din makes a mistake, specifically regarding avodah zarah. They matter some type of avodah zarah in psak. So that as well, where the pesukim talk about bringing a korban for that psak. Same rule. It requires that that which they had paskin upon in avodah zarah was an avodah zarah that really, if dam mezid would be kares, if dam b'shogeg be chatas. As that's the Brayso. So the Tanna the Mishnah also says kol mitzvah shebet Torah shechayav knows done kares v'shkas chatas. Any mitzvah in the Torah that has this, that is doinoi mezid would be kares if it would dam b'shogeg chatas. Yochid mevi kisva oiseira. If a individual will do that avera b'shogeg, so he's going to bring. He has an option, either this sheep or this goat. Nasi, if the nasi, the leader, so does this avera, maybe sire. So there the pasuk says he has to bring the male goat. Mashiach u Beis Din mevi'in par. If the Kohen Mashiach or the Beis Din will make such a mistake, Beis Din referring to when they paskin incorrectly, something like this. So they're going to bring this par halam davar, par the cow. V'avaros kechavim yachid nasi u Mashiach mevi'in seira. And then when you're dealing with specific avera of avodah zarah of parsha shlach, so there, any of the individuals, Yachid, Nasi, or Mashiach, all need to bring the female goat, the seira, tzibor, mevi'in parvis sa'ir. And when it's the Beis Din psak that applied to the full tzibor, there's another gerus on the side, who Beis Din, it's a little more consistent. Beis Din's mevi'in, they bring 2 animals, a parvis sa'ir, parallel to chatas. So the Torah says, not only is there a sa'ir for a chatas, also there's a cow for an olah. Fine, so that's the Brais in the Mishnah. So we're trying to get at what do we use Aleha for, Lefi Rabbi. So we need to bring, that was the rule, and now we're going to bring the Brais that uses Aleha to teach me that rule. Menani mili, how do we know this? The Tanna Rabbanan is another Brais. Brais says, V'noidach chatos asher chatu Aleha. The pasuk says in Vayikra that the Beis Din had paskin, whatever they paskin, that a certain avera was okay, and it turned out it was v'noda chatas shechotuleh. It was found out the chatas, the sin that they had sinned. Everybody was following their psak, right, and they were being chote, and now it was found out that it was incorrect. So now there's this korban that has to be brought, the par halamadavar, this par. Now, what aveira are we dealing with? Rabbi himself over here, the same Rabbi, he actually tells me that I have a derashah Aleha from here to the Aleha written by Achosisha, by Arayos. Achosisha is an example of if done b'mezid it's kares, if done b'shog it's chatas. So also here, this par halamadavar is only brought on an avera likewise, where the avera if done b'mezid is kares, if done b'shog is chatas. Ashkan sibar, so this is a good source for where Allah is written. Of a noda which is written by the par, which the Beis Din will bring for paskening incorrectly for the tzibur. Mashiach manolan. How do we know if the kohen Mashiach is going to do an aveira b'shoigig? That his special korban that makes him different than the regular individual who brings a korban, the yachid of any other person in Klal Yisrael. How do you know that that's also only by zdono karis? So there's a phrase written by the Parsha Mashiach le'oshmas ha'am, full pasuk. If he sins, la'ashmas ha'am, like the sin of the nation, and he brings a special chatos, the par. So that expression la'ashmas ha'am teaches us that he's similar. His rules is going to be similar to the korban which is brought for when the Beis Din is going to issue a psak for the entire the nation. Therefore, we're given the same rule that just like the par halamadavar of the Beis Din is only brought if it's done karash chatas from Aleha, so too the Mashiach. Hari Mashiach kitzibur. How do I know that a stam individual that the Torah talks about bringing a korban chatas, or the nasi that has his special korban? How do you know that those people's chatos are only where's dono kares and avera? If dama means be kares, asim mitzvahs. So there's two words. By them it says mitzvahs, and also previously it says mitzvahs. So we're going to learn out the gzera shava. That's all by stam averas. And move over to parsha shlach, where we go specific to the avera of avodah zarah. Avodah zarah as well, we said in the Oraysa as well as in the Mishnah, is only allowed chatas. It's also only going to be brought where if dama means kares, if dama shogeg, it would be a chatas, meaning an individual. Sibur. So how do I know that is only by? How do you know it's only true that by azdonu kares? Maybe it's by any type of avodah zarah, even if it's not a type of avodah zarah, which if done means it would be kares. So there as well, we're going to be able to darshan pull off of the drashos we had mentioned above. Sibur ba'avodah chavim. If the Beis Din will issue a psak for the full tzibur regarding avodah zarah, they bring their special korban yalef meini meini. So it says meini over there. It says meini back in Vayikra in the previous pesukim. So that's going to be gzera shava to teach me has to be dono garis by avodah zarah as well. Yachi naso Mashiach, the individuals, any of these three. How do I know it's dafkas dono garis of avodah zarah? Mi v'im nefesh achas. The pasuk continues. V'im nefesh achas in parsha shlach. If any individual person will do the aveira, then he brings his special korban. So v'im, the vav connects it. First, the Gemara explains that nefesh achas is echa yachi v'echa nasi v'echa Mashiach v'mashra. First of all, nefesh achas includes any type of individual, whether it's a stam individual, it's the leader, it's the kohen Mashiach. Then vav meisiv al yin rishon. So we have the v'im, which connects it to the previous pesukim. What's in the previous pesukim that we could learn out the tachton min ha'alyon? This parsha, these individual people from the Elyon. The Elyon was this tzibur, when the Beis Din issued the psak for the tzibur. And we just said from there we have gzera shameini meini. Okay, fine, period. So this turns out that Rabbi uses Aleha to teach me this rule that basically chatos, whatever type of chatos, for anybody, whether it's avodah zarah, whatever topic actually, any type of avera, has to be zdonei kares in order to bring such a chatos, and the source of it all is Aleha. From there, he's able to draw off of that using zera shavas and drashos of like avav, v'im, and he pulls it over to everything. Continues the Gemara of Rabbanon. So now let's go back to the Rabbanon who don't have Aleha available for this rule, because they use Aleha back on Daf Gimel to explain the Mishnah Daf Beis for Arayos v'tzaros. So according to Rabbanon, how do they know this whole Oraysa Mishnah that Chatos, by any form, is only going to be brought when it's done in kares? The answer is Nafkalumi the Karli Rabbi Shua Brei. Rabbi Shua, sorry, the Makri Rabbi Shua Brei. Rabbi Shua read to his son the following pasuk: Torah achas yilachem lo bishkaga. Pasuk says this is there in Parshat Shalach by the Chatos, which are brought for doing avodah zarah. Bishogeg says there's one after it discusses the specifics. It says at the end Torah achas yilachem lo bishkaga. There's one rule, one law for you for doing it mistakenly. And then the next pasuk continues, the hanefesh yishtasa biarama, and the person who does this avera with the hand upheld. And if you continue in the pasuk, the Gemara doesn't quote it. What does it say? It's important. At the end of the pasuk, v'nichrosa nefeshi, he gets kares. So obviously we're dealing with someone who did it on purpose. He did this avera on purpose, and he gets kares. So says Rabbi Shua to his son, it says in the first pasuk, Torah achas, one law for everyone. So Torah achas is referring to the full Torah in this drashah. The whole Torah is hukash compared to the next pasuk of avodah zarah. Well, avodah zarah has to be kares, as we just said. The end of the second pasuk says what? Kares. So we're dealing with specifically avodah zarah of kares. This is going to be limud to Torah achas. The entire Torah is only going to be brought this chatas if it's zdaina kares. So good. We have a good source for any time an individual does an avera. In order for him to bring a korban chatas, he would have to do an avera, which, if done b'meizer, would be kares. How do you know any individual? Because the pasuk said the im nefesh achas, right? If you go to pasuk of Zayin, im nefesh achas techata, that was pasuk of Zayin. Pasuk chav tes, which is 2 pesukim later, was this pasuk of Torah achas, and 3 pesukim later was lamuz, was of hanefesh. So it's coming off of the whole story of nefesh achas, or an individual. Okay, good. So that's a good source for an individual. And bein b'avodas kachavim, bein b'shar mitzvahs, and this doesn't differentiate whether it's avodah zarah or any avera. Tzibur b'avodas kachavim b'nayin. But now we're going to go over to tzibur. How do you know if the Beis Din issued a psak for the tzibur? They've been doing avodah zarah b'shoigeg based on the psak of the Beis Din, that the special korban mentioned there that the Beis Din will bring is only by zdoinai kares. Amakra v'im nefesh. So the same v'im used before in Rabbi is going to be used here in the Rabbanon, but in the opposite direction. The Vav, V'im Nefesh, we're right now holding by, we have a source in the later parsha, in the Tachton, by the individuals, based on Torah achas. Here we were trying to use it as, to draw off of it to a tzibur, which is earlier, the Elyon. V'yom Elyon mitachton. So we go in that direction from Tachton up to the Elyon. Fine, so far we have everything except El Tzibur B'Shar Mitzvos Minon. The one that we're still missing is the tzibur, when the Beis Din issued the psak for the tzibur by any other mitzvah other than avodah zarah. How do I know that it's only by zdaina kares? Yalav meinim meini. Same drashah before the Rabbi. Ksir shavim meinim meini. Period. Now let's go back to Rabbi. V'Rabbi hay Torah achas me'avile. Now what does Rabbi do with this extra Torah achas? Seems to be extra. That the had to conclude that parsha with there's one law for everyone. What's that teaching me? Mivayile. Look at the Tanna. He'll use it for the following. Oraysa says we find that the Torah differentiates between individuals doing avodah zarah, two groups, great amount of people doing avodah zarah, meaning nidachas. You have a full city doing majority, so much of the city is doing avodah zarah. You find the difference between their halachos, and that is what yichidim b'skila, individuals who do the avodah zarah. What's their oinesh? They're punished with skila. Therefore, right, it's very severe. Skila is very severe. Therefore, as far as their money, the Torah, there's no halach in the Torah of destroying their money. Their money escapes. Merubin, besides, but when the full city of people are doing avodah zarah, they're nidachas. So their Torah says it gives a more lenient punishment. Saif, the sword. The fichach avad. So there, their money is actually dealt with more stringently, it's destroyed, it's burnt. So that's the rule. So because we find that because you find differences between individual and the tzibur legabe, their punishment. So you might think there's also will be a difference regarding the korban they bring. Well, let's discuss that in a minute, what the difference would be. So Rabban are going to use terachas. There's one rule for anyone doing avodah zarah, whether it's individuals or tzibur, community, it's all going to have the same halacha. Legabi korban. Of course, putting aside the nasi gets his own, as we saw, and the tzibur, when the Beis Din issued the psak. So right here, what exactly would be the havamina? What would be practically the korban they would bring? That would be different. Masklar of chalkim or gunya. So we're going to ask the kasha time because you're telling me because terachas teaches me they get the same korban. You would think that it would be different, like we said, my laisu. What would be the korban they would bring that would be different? So he gives different suggestions, and he says he rejects everyone. Laisu par, to say that they should bring the par. Tzibur b'shar mitzvahs demaisi. Well, they're not going to be different than the tzibur by other mitzvahs of Parshas Vayikra. That's exactly what they bring, meaning the tzibur referring to when the Beis Din issued the psak, shelo kedin, they bring a par. Kisva, to say bring the kisva, yachid b'shar mitzvahs. That's the regular korban chatas, the yachid. The regular individual, any avera, where it's done in kares, he brings this sheep, female sheep. Sa'ir, the goat, the male goat, nasi b'shar mitzvahs demaisi. That also he already found the Parsha Vayikra for the nasi. Par lo'il of tzarah chatos. So now he gets a little more creative. So you get 2 korbanos, right, which we're familiar with. Par for the oil, par for chatos. Sibra v'retzchol the ma'isi. That also he didn't pull it out of a hat. That's there in the pasuk. It's by the tzibur in Parsha Shalach v'avodah zarah. So we're still not going to find any differences. Ve'ela my seira. The last option he has is the seira, the female goat. Well, that yachanami hanukarana. We said that was the yachid's choice. He could bring the seira, or he could bring the kisva. So it is one of the choices. So we don't find any differences. Says the Gemara, it's chisoli tarachas yelachem. Why? Real interesting havamina. It says the tzibur b'hayra, my Beis Din paskin for them incorrectly. So over there, we say, if it was a situation of avodah zarah, what do they bring? Par for an olos or chatas. Inunami naisu. They would also bring those 2 animals, but ifcha. You would think that they bring 2 animals, but flip it. Par for a chatas, and sar for the oila. That would be their difference. Kamash malon terachas is not. Inami, the second option, sarif in lo takana. Second option is that the havamina would be, they need a korban, but because we have to find the difference between their korban and between the yechidim and the tzibur, so the tzibur needs the special korban, but there's no korban to find because every korban you pick, it's always going to be similar to every other person in the terrace. So therefore, you would have thought you just don't bring it. Kamash malon, kamash tarachas. That no, there is a korban to bring, and they're the same. Period. Mazel tov. So we finished the Sugya that started on Gimel Amid Beis, brought us here to test. Went through the reasoning why you need the Drashos. Aseido Chalosis Sheish Bakaris is a real havamina in any situation or not. And the 2 different braisos, Aleha with lakach v'ima, and how each Tanna deals with each other's Tanna's pesukim. Right, let's just begin this Gemara that leads into tomorrow. So Amar Levi le Rabbi. So let's go back to the Mishnah. Levi tells the Rabbi, right? A whole new discussion. My area the Tani Tesvav. Going back to the Mishnah that Beis Din Aleph. It says there's 50 women that pater their co-wives from yibum chalitza yibum. Why does it say 15? Unless he tezayin, it should be 16. Now he doesn't tell us what's the 16th. What is he thinking? So Rebbe has to, in responding, he will clarify that. What the havamina was, what are they discussing? Amar Le. The Rebbe tells Levi, now he speaks to him. It seems to me that he, He doesn't want to speak to him directly. He doesn't have a brain. What's he thinking? My daitich. Then he speaks directly. What are you thinking? Imoy, you want to add in a 16th ervah, his mother. Is that what you're thinking? Now, right away, if you just stop there, imo, his mother, that's impossible. That's going to be the case of one of the examples of the Mishnah later. That's impossible because yibum is automatically two brothers from the father. They have the same father. One of them was married to a woman. If that woman's going to be the alive brother's, the remaining brother's mother, well, then she wasn't able to get married to him. There was no tefis kedushin because that's his father's, right? The deceased's father's wife, Eishes Av. So he says, you can't. What are you referring to if you would think it's imo? Anusas aviv. It's not his father's wife. It's the anus of his father. So that should be in the Mishnah. You have two brothers sharing the same father, Reuven and Shimon, sharing the father Yaakov, and Yaakov was Ma'anes Rachel, and then Rachel gets married to Reuven. Reuven dies. So Shimon wants to do yibum to Rachel. So the Mishnah is saying that he can't. And she patters yibum chalitza from her tzarah also. Says Rabbi, Ima nusali pluktu Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan pluktu lekamari. That's not a good example to add into the Mishnah, to the list, because it's true, it might be true, but it's a machlokes. It's only true according to Rabbi Yehuda, because we had already on Daf Dalet and Aleph, was a machlokes if this is added to the pasuk of lo yikach. What was the pasuk again? Lo yikach yishus eishes aviv lo yigala kanaf aviv. So what's kanaf aviv? So it's a machlokes we had there. Right, Rabbi Yehuda says kanaf sharab aviv lo yigala, which is referring to the anusa. And the Rabbanan disagree, and they say it's a shemeres yama of the father. So, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the anus of the father, you're right. Hold on. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the anus of the father is impossible. You can't have such a case where the anus of the father marries the brother because she wouldn't be able to get married to him. The same way that the Eishes Av wouldn't be possible. So also Anus's Aviv wouldn't be possible because he darshan from there that there's no Tvisas Kedushin to that brother that had died. So we don't want to get into machlokas, and therefore we don't mention. So Mara says, V'lo, you're telling me a rule that our mission is not discussing any examples which are a machlokas. B'arei Isser Mitzvah v'Isser Kedusha the Pliga Rabbi Kiva Rabbanan. Ukatani. So later in the Masechta, the second parak, Daf Chof, there is examples in the Mishnah itself of something which is a machlokes. Isser Mitzvah Kedusha. What's Isser Mitzvah Kedusha? So Isser Mitzvah, one interpretation of Daf Chof is that it's referring to Shnios. So there's Arayos which are derives, and then there's Isser Mitzvah, Arayos which are only B'Derabanan. Isser Kedusha, in that same interpretation, Kedusha is referring to an Isser which is only a Lusase, like Mamzeros in this case, right? She would be a Mamzeros, or something of that sort, where there's no karis, or Mrs. Bezin. So what happens if you have a woman who's falling to yibum, and she is a shnia, she's an Isser Deraban, Isser Mitzvah, or Isser Kedusha, she's a Losase. So the Mishnah says over there, you can't do yibum, but still chalitza is required. So the Gemara is saying that really that halacha is machlokes Rabbi Kiva Rabbanan. Rabbanan hold that, but Rabbi Kiva holds that, at least in the first one he's going to agree, of course, by Shnios Derabanan, of course you can't exempt from chalitza because midaraisa there's a zika, there's a yibum. You don't do yibum midarabanan, so you still do chalitza. But the second one, Isser Kedusha, regular Isser Lav, Rabbi Kiva actually holds that Isser Lav does not have yibum or chalitza. His opinion later in the Masechta is that there's no tfisas kedushin on an Isser Lav. We're all used to that. The only time you don't have a tfisas kedushin, trying to marry a woman who's an Isser Kares, impossible. Misa Bezin for sure, impossible. But Isser Lav, of course it's possible. Give a Mamzeros kedushin, it works. But Rabbi Kiva's opinion is it doesn't. And the Gemara understands, this piece of Gemara understands that the same way that it doesn't work to Bitosis kedushin, she's an impossible wife and an impossible Yevamos to do yibum, and therefore there's no chiyuv yibum or chalitza. If you have time, look at the Banan Tosos. He wonders about that. Why should that be? Where does this come from? Just because the Rekiva says there's no tefis kedushin, why does that mean? In asay do chalusasay. I mean, it's a regular conflict between an asay of yibum and a lusasay. So do the asay, do the mitzvah. So that's something to think about. Says the Gemara. And one more kasha we're going to have very soon, if you blot from here, that actually, even though we learned at Daf Beis that Drashos of Arayos do not do yibum or chalitza, Beishami disagrees. He says that tzarahs do. So what's happening at Daf Beis and Aleph? We're just saying it as a blanket rule that there's no yibum or chalitza. It's a machlokes. And Rabbi's rule to respond to Levi, to reject his suggestion, it should be 16 in the Mishnah, it's to say we're not dealing with machlokes. So Shemar said Bishamai come in Mishnah, the famous rule, Bishamai is not going to be even significant in this discussion because Bishamai come in a Mishnah. We don't deal with that shita. So we look at it as if there's no machlokes in our discussion. Says the Gemara. One more question. What about the second to last example of the 15 in our Mishnah? Continuing on Beis, the brother who was not living at the same time as the deceased, who does not have yibum chalitza to this woman falling. The pliger shivin rabbanon in the next parak, right in the beginning of the next parak, we have a machlokes about this. Rabbi Shimon actually in certain cases he allows Eishes Achiv that was not living at the same time as the brother that had died to do yibum or chalitza, both. Uketani, but it says it in our Mishnah. It's a machlokes. Says the Gemara, Shimon. There's two cases. One case where Shimon for sure actually agrees, and that's going to be the one of our Mishnah. Let's just see the three lines. We'll explain what the case is. The Amar of Oshia Chalakar B'Shimon Av Rishona. Rav Oshia in that second parak is going to say that Shimon actually does disagree, even in this first example, referring to this case, because the Mishnah in the second parak brings first the case of Nolad L'Basof Yibum, and later talks about Yibum L'Basof Nolad. So he argues in both, including this case. He completely disagrees on the whole rule. Haitos Rav Oshia. Gemara concludes that Rav Oshia, we already say in the second parak, is not true. We bring a raya against him, and therefore we're able to uphold that there's an example where everybody would agree. Okay, so what is this case of no little b'sof yibum? To explain it, we'll finish with this: that you have two brothers. That was the case, and one of them died. Okay, and then another brother is born. That's Nolad, and then. Okay, let's just give them names. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven and Shimon were alive together. Reuven died. His wife is falling to Yibum to Shimon. Before Shimon does Yibum, Levi is born. Another brother. Shimon does Yibum. Shimon dies. No children. That woman, who originally was the wife of Reuven, does she do Yibum to Levi? That's no little b'sof Yibum. Says the Mishnah, no Yibum. The Gemara is concluding. Everybody agrees to that, including Rabbi Shimon. The case where Shimon's going to disagree with the Rabbanon would be Yibum L'B'sof Nolad. What's that? Same case, Reuven Shimon, but before Levi is born, Shimon already does Yibum. Now Levi is born. So Levi entered into the world before, in a situation where the woman was already the wife of Shimon. She wasn't a Yevamos waiting for Yibum, and then all of a sudden Levi is born and she's waiting for Yibum, including two Levi, and the Levi, she's an ervah. There's no mitzvah of Yibum there. Ki yesh v'achim yachtov, they have to be together. So therefore, that's that situation where Shimon would agree. But in the case where Shimon had already done Yibum, Levi enters into the world. His first encounter with this woman is she's already a wife. She's not a Yevamos waiting for Yibum. So then Rabbi Shimon disagrees. But our Mishnah would be an example where everybody agrees. No little b'sof Yibum. Shukaya for consistency. We made it. Sure.